She was 35, a mother trapped in a violent marriage. He was 27, a quiet neighbor with a kind heart and a past of his own. One night their worlds collided when she showed up on his doorstep, battered and desperate, clutching her daughter's hand. What began as a moment of rescue slowly grew into something deeper, something neither of them expected: healing love and the fight for freedom. This is a story about age, courage, second chances, and the kind of love that saves you when you've forgotten how to save yourself. Elliot Carter had always appreciated the quiet. After years of working in the bustling city, the serene suburbs of Portland offered a much-needed respite. His modest home, nestled among a row of similar houses, was his sanctuary. The evenings were typically filled with the soft hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a distant dog. It was a place where one could hear their own thoughts, and for Elliot, that was a blessing. On this particular evening, Elliot was lounging on his well-worn couch, a book resting on his lap. The soft glow of the reading lamp cast gentle shadows across the room. He sipped his lukewarm coffee, savoring the bitterness that grounded him after a long day of work. The tranquility was palpable, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. But then the peace shattered. A muffled thud echoed through the wall, followed by a sharp cry. Elliot's brow furrowed. He set his book aside, straining to listen. Another crash, louder this time, and the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. His heart rate quickened. He stood up, moving toward the window that faced his neighbor's house. The curtains were drawn, but the flickering lights inside hinted at chaos. He hesitated, debating whether to intervene. It wasn't his place, was it? People had arguments. It was a part of life. But something about the sounds unsettled him. Then came the scream, high-pitched, filled with terror, and abruptly cut off. Without thinking, Elliot grabbed his phone and headed toward the front door. As he reached for the handle, a frantic pounding erupted from the other side. He swung the door open to find Sarah Whitmore, her face bruised and eyes wide with fear, clutching her daughter tightly. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Can we come in?" Elliot stepped aside, allowing them entry. "Of course, come in." Sarah moved quickly, her daughter Leia clinging to her. Elliot closed the door behind them, locking it for good measure. He turned to see Sarah sinking onto the couch, her body shaking. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though tears streamed down her face. Leia buried her face into her mother's shoulder, silent sobs racking her small frame. Elliot fetched a blanket, draping it over them. "You're safe here. Do you need anything?" Water ice. As Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, just thank you." He nodded, giving them space as he moved to the kitchen to get some water. He couldn't help but feel a surge of protectiveness. No one should have to flee their home in fear. Returning with a glass, he handed it to Sarah. "Do you want me to call someone, the police?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I just needed to get out." Elliot respected her decision, but couldn't ignore the bruises on her face. He sat nearby, offering silent support. Over the next hour, the tension in the room eased slightly. Leia had fallen asleep, her small form curled up next to her mother. Sarah sipped the water, her hands still trembling. "Thank you," she whispered again. "I didn't know where else to go." Elliot offered a reassuring smile. "You're always welcome here." As the night deepened, Elliot prepared the guest room for them. He ensured they were comfortable, providing extra blankets and pillows before retiring to his own room. He paused at the doorway. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Sarah nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Good night, Elliot." "Good night, Sarah." As he lay in bed, sleep eluded him. The events of the evening replayed in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah's bruised face and the fear in her eyes. He vowed to do whatever he could to help them, to ensure they never had to experience such terror again. The faint hum of morning was just beginning to stir when Elliot stepped into his kitchen, every movement mechanical. He hadn't slept, not really. He tried to doze off on the couch after making sure Sarah and Leia were resting in the guest room, but his mind refused to settle. Instead, he sat for hours staring at the darkened ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of the house and the rhythm of his thoughts pounding against his skull. What kind of man beats his wife? What kind of father terrifies his daughter? He'd seen some rough things in life. People who'd grown up broken by circumstance, by addiction, by war. But this, a mother and child cowering in the middle of the night, bruised and shivering, asking a near stranger for safety, that haunted him. Elliot gave up on sleep and started making breakfast. Nothing fancy, he wasn't a chef, but he could do eggs, toast pancakes if he had to, the kind of food that made a house feel warm again. The smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee filled the small kitchen. He set the table quietly as if not to disturb the delicate balance of peace in his home. There was something sacred about it now, like he was hosting more than just guests. He was keeping something precious safe. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. He turned. Sarah stood in the hallway wrapped in one of his old sweatshirts, her eyes puffy but alert. She looked exhausted and somehow more grounded than the night before, like just having survived until morning had fortified her in some small way. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said quietly. "You didn't. I never went to bed." She stepped closer, folding her arms. "I'm sorry for everything, for putting you in the middle of—" "You didn't put me in the middle of anything," Elliot interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You showed up at my door needing help. You don't have to apologize for that." Sarah offered a faint nod, lips pressing together in a tight line. The silence that followed wasn't awkward but fragile, like the hush after a storm when the world tries to figure out if it's safe again. He poured her a cup of coffee, set it on the table with quiet intention. She sat down across from him. Steam rose between them. After a few minutes, she began to speak. "His name's Rick. We've been married for 10 years. She looked down at the chipped mug. At first, he was everything charming, funny. He loved that I was quiet, said it made me mysterious. Elliot didn't say anything. He just listened. "I thought I hit the jackpot," she said with a dry laugh that didn't reach her eyes. But somewhere along the way, he changed. Or maybe I just didn't want to see who he really was." She paused, pressing her fingers to her temple. "The drinking started after Laya was born. He lost his job at the factory and just gave up. Blamed me for everything, for being tired, for not being enough, for breathing wrong." Elliot's stomach twisted, but he stayed quiet. Sarah continued, her voice hollow. "At first it was just words, cold silences, then yelling, then pushing. The bruises didn't start right away, and every time he said he was sorry, every single time." Her eyes glistened. "But last night something changed. He looked at me like I wasn't even a person anymore, like I was just an obstacle. And Laya saw everything. She always sees more than I think she does." "She's smart," Elliot said quietly. "She knows. I stayed because I thought it was the right thing for her, for our family." "But what kind of family is this?" She finally looked up at him, anger and shame flashing behind her tears. "What kind of mother lets her child grow up afraid you left?" he said. "You protected her. That's what matters now." She blinked hard, the tears finally spilling over. Elliot reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "You're not weak, Sarah. You're surviving. That's strength most people never find." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, the sun crept through the blinds, casting soft light on the table. A new day was beginning. A small voice called out from the hallway. "Mommy." Sarah turned instantly, rising from her seat. "In here, baby." Leia shuffled into the room in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Elliot and gave a shy wave. "Hi, hey there," Elliot said gently. "You hungry?" She nodded. "I was thinking pancakes. Maybe even chocolate chip if you're lucky." Leia's eyes lit up just slightly. Sarah gave him a look of surprise. "You keep chocolate chips around?" "I've got a sweet tooth," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Want to help me make them, Maya?" The little girl nodded again and took a seat at the counter. Elliot handed her a whisk and some flour, and together they began the slow ritual of making breakfast. There was something sacred about it, an ordinary act that carried the weight of extraordinary healing. Sarah watched from the table, her arms wrapped around her own torso. She was still visibly in pain physically and emotionally, but something about the way Elliot looked at Laya with patience, with softness, stirred something in her she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like there might be a way forward. By the time the pancakes were done, the house smelled like vanilla and warmth. They sat down together, and for a few minutes the only sounds were forks clinking and syrup being poured. Elliot glanced at Sarah. "Do you know what you want to do today? There's a community center a few blocks over that can help women." "I think I need to go to the police," she said, her voice low. "Make a report. I'm tired of running." He nodded. "I can take you if that's what you want." "It is," she said. "I want to protect my daughter. I want to get him out of our lives." Elliot didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for his phone, searching for the number of a domestic violence advocate. He handed the phone to Sarah. "They'll walk you through the process, help you with everything shelter legal, aid support groups. You don't have to do this alone." She stared at the screen for a long time, then slowly nodded. By mid-afternoon, Elliot had driven them to the local precinct. Sarah gave her statement, answered every question, signed every form. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't falter. Leah stayed close to Elliot the entire time, holding his hand like she'd known him for years. That night, after arranging temporary housing through the Advocacy Center, Elliot helped Sarah and Leah settle into a clean, modest apartment donated by a local shelter program. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was safe. Before he left, Sarah walked him to the door. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "for everything, for being there when you didn't have to be." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just keep going. Keep being brave. That's more than enough." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time without fear in her eyes. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together." And with that, he left his heart heavy but hopeful, because even in the darkest night, there had been a sliver of light, and sometimes that's all it takes. The following week unfolded like the calm after a hurricane. Everything was quieter, but not in the peaceful way. It was the sort of silence that follows destruction, when people sift through the rubble of their lives, unsure what can be salvaged. Sarah sat cross-legged on the second-hand couch in her temporary apartment, staring at the divorce papers spread across the coffee table. Her hands hovered above the pen, trembling slightly. Leah was asleep in the bedroom after a long day at school, her first day back in nearly 2 weeks. Sarah knew what she had to do. She just didn't know if she had the strength to do it. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, not loud or urgent, just familiar, reassuring. She opened it to find Elliot standing there holding a brown paper bag. "Dinner delivery," he said with a smile. "And yes, it's from that Thai place you like." Her face softened. "You didn't have to. Maybe not," he said, stepping inside, "but I wanted to." She let him in, thankful for the comfort of his presence. In the weeks since she and Leah had moved into the shelter's temporary apartment program, Elliot had become a regular visitor. He never pushed, never intruded, but he always seemed to show up at the right time, whether it was to bring groceries, help with legal paperwork, or just be someone to talk to when the nights felt too long. "I saw my lawyer today," Sarah said as they sat down. "She thinks I've got a strong case, especially with the report, the pictures, and the witness statement you gave." Elliot nodded. "I meant every word of it." "I know." They ate quietly, the air between them comfortable, the kind of quiet that no longer needed to be filled with small talk. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the small living room. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of Rick?" Elliot asked gently. She shook her head. "Of what happens after. Of being alone. Of messing up. Of becoming my mother." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean my mom stayed?" Sarah said, fingers clenching her fork. "For years. We all knew what was going on. Her black eyes, the screaming, the broken furniture, but she stayed. She used to say, one day it'll stop and everything will be okay again. But it never stopped." She looked up, her eyes shining. "I promised myself I'd never be like her, that I'd leave the first time a man ever raised his voice. But promises are easier before you love someone, before you have a kid." Elliot placed his hand over hers, grounding her. "You're not her, Sarah. You already broke the cycle. You left. You protected your daughter. You chose something better." She took a deep breath, as if trying to let his words soak into all the cracked places inside her. "Leah talks about you all the time, you know," she said, smiling faintly. "She says you're the first grown-up she feels safe around. That means more than you know." "She's got a good sense for people," Sarah added. "So maybe I should trust her judgment." Elliot's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. There was something different in her eyes tonight, less guarded, more open, like the walls she'd carefully built were finally beginning to lower. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about how I can help more long-term. Not just short visits and dumplings, but really help." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean I've got space at my house?" "The guest room. It's safer than here and closer to Leah's school. If you ever needed a place while you figure things out." Her lips parted, stunned. You're not obligated to say yes, and I wouldn't ask for anything in return, he added quickly. But you're doing this alone, and you shouldn't have to. Sarah hesitated, emotion welling in her throat. The offer felt too generous, too kind, but it wasn't pity in his eyes. It was something steadier, stronger. I'll think about it, she said softly. That's all I ask. That night after Elliot left, she stood in the doorway of Laya's room watching her daughter sleep. Her small hand clutched a stuffed fox Elliot had brought her earlier that week. Even in sleep, her brow furrowed slightly, like her dreams hadn't yet learned the world was safe again. Sarah leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Maybe it was time not just to protect, but to rebuild. And maybe Elliot wasn't just a friend. Maybe he was the beginning of something new. 3 weeks later, the decision came slowly but surely. Sarah packed their things again, this time not in panic but in hope. Elliot had spent the weekend helping her move into his house. He cleared out the guest room for Laya and gave Sarah the spare bedroom down the hall. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it felt more like home than anywhere else had in a long time. On their first morning there, Elliot made pancakes again. You're going to spoil us, Sarah teased, sipping coffee at his kitchen island while Leia colored beside her. Elliot shrugged. I figure you both deserve a little spoiling. Sarah watched him, noticing the way he moved around the kitchen with ease, the way he smiled at Leia when he passed her the syrup, the way he caught her gaze and held it just a moment too long, then looked away, heart beating a little faster. Later that afternoon, while Leia napped, Sarah wandered into the backyard where Elliot was fixing the garden hose. I didn't know you were a handyman, she said, leaning against the fence. I'm more of a YouTube tutorial kind of guy, he admitted with a grin, but I make it work. She smiled, then turned serious. Thank you again for everything. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. I'm just glad you're safe. She walked over to where he stood, close enough to touch, but not quite. Safe is new for me. Still feels unfamiliar. He looked at her, his expression softening. It'll feel normal eventually. Give it time. I think she said carefully that it's not just the place that makes me feel safe. It's you. The words landed like a confession, honest, unfiltered. Elliot swallowed hard. Sarah, she stepped closer, drawn to him. But before either of them could say more, the screen door creaked open and Leia's sleepy voice called out, Mom. Sarah stepped back instinctively, guilt flickering across her face. Elliot gave her a small, understanding smile. Go ahead, he said. Man, we've got time. And as she turned to go inside, she realized that maybe, just maybe, time was finally on her side. It had been over a month since Sarah and Leia moved into Elliot's home, and despite the newness of it all, something about the routine was beginning to feel right. Morning started with coffee and cartoons, Leia wrapped in a blanket on the couch, while Sarah read quietly across the room. Elliot had grown used to the soft sounds of laughter echoing from the hallway and the way Sarah hummed under her breath when she cooked dinner. Even the stillness of his once quiet house felt warmer now, like it had finally been lived in, no longer a museum of solitude. Elliot found himself smiling more, thinking about Sarah, more wanting things he hadn't let himself want in years. And yet he said nothing because healing came in stages and love demanded patience. On a Saturday afternoon, the three of them visited the local park. It was sunny and the breeze was warm, the kind of rare spring day that felt like a gift after a long winter. Leia chased butterflies near the sandbox while Elliot and Sarah sat on a bench sipping lemonade from a paper cup. She hasn't smiled like that in years, Sarah said, watching her daughter twirl. It's like she's becoming herself again. She always was, Elliot replied. She just needed space to breathe. Sarah glanced at him, faint smile playing at her lips. You always know exactly what to say. No, he said, chuckling. I'm just better at listening. Their eyes met. There was something in that silence, thick with things unsaid, something fragile, but no longer uncertain. Sarah looked away, first her cheeks warming. I got a call yesterday from the courthouse. The divorce hearing is scheduled for next month. Elliot's expression shifted. Are you ready for that? I think so. I mean, I'm scared. But I know it's right. She hesitated, then added, They're also going to serve Rick the restraining order papers this week. Elliot nodded. Do you want me there when they do? I don't want you anywhere near him, she said quickly. Then softened. Not because I don't need support, just because he doesn't get to drag you into this. He already did. Elliot replied the night you knocked on my door. She turned to him, heart thudding. I don't want you to feel like I'm a burden. Sarah, he said, voice low and steady. You're not a burden. You're brave, and I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because I care. There was that silence again, full and pregnant with the possibility of more, but before either of them could speak, Leia's shriek cut through the park. Mommy? Mommy! Sarah jumped to her feet, racing across the grass toward her daughter, who was pointing toward the street. Elliot followed, eyes narrowing. Across the road, standing by a rusted blue pickup truck, was Rick. His clothes were wrinkled. He looked thinner, more sunken than before, but the moment his eyes met Sarah's, Elliot saw something vicious still burning behind them. Rick smirked. Sarah froze. Elliot moved between her and the street instinctively. Sarah, take Leia and go. Sarah scooped Leia into her arms and turned, heart hammering, as Elliot stepped forward, his hands loose at his sides. Rick didn't cross the road. He just stood there watching, measuring. Then he raised his hands slowly in a mock salute before getting into his truck and driving off. When Elliot returned to the house that evening, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table shaking. I called the police, she said without looking up. Filed a report. They said they'd try to track his location, but unless he violates the restraining order formally, there's not much they can do. Elliot sat across from her. I'm sorry. I thought I was safe, she whispered. I thought we had time. You still do, he said. This doesn't change that. It just means we have to be more careful. Her hands were clenched. I hate that he can still scare me. That fear isn't weakness, Elliot said. It's proof that you survived. They sat in silence for a moment. The clock ticked softly on the wall. I was going to tell you something, she said finally, voice barely audible before we saw him. What was it? She looked up, eyes locking with his. I think I'm starting to fall for you. Elliot inhaled sharply as if the wind had been knocked from his chest. I didn't want to, she said, voice breaking. Not like this, not while I'm still rebuilding. But I wake up every morning and you're the first person I think about. I look at how you treat Leia, and I can't pretend it doesn't mean everything. He reached for her hand slowly, carefully. I've been falling too, he said softly, but I didn't want to rush you. You've been through too much. I'm tired of being afraid, she said, of my past, of my feelings of what might go wrong. I don't want to be ruled by fear anymore. He leaned in, not with hunger or urgency, but with reverence, as if he were touching something sacred. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and steady, not the beginning of a fairy tale, but the continuation of something real, something earned. When they pulled apart, Sarah smiled through her tears. What happens now? Now, Elliot said, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. Now we fight together. The day of the court hearing arrived draped in gray skies and silence. Sarah stood in front of the bathroom mirror, straightening the collar of her blouse for the third time. Her hands trembled, though her expression stayed calm, focused. In the other room, Elliot helped Leia finish her cereal, keeping his voice light and steady. It was something he'd grown good at these past weeks, holding steady while Sarah faced storms. But even he couldn't stop the way his stomach tightened as the clock ticked closer to the hearing. When Sarah emerged, her eyes found his. Ready. He nodded. Are you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt to hug Leia tightly, her voice catching as she whispered, I'm doing this for us, okay? So you never have to feel afraid again. Leia didn't fully understand the weight of the day, but she nodded, her arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. You're brave, Mommy, Sarah smiled. I'm trying to be. Elliot walked her to the car, holding her hand the whole way. He couldn't go into the courtroom with her. Only witnesses and legal counsel were allowed, but he promised to wait in the hallway the entire time. That was enough. As they drove, Sarah's thoughts flickered like snapshots, Rick's smirk at the park, her mother's bruises from decades ago, Leia's laughter in the backyard just days before Elliot's voice telling her she wasn't alone. By the time she stepped into the courthouse, her shoulders were square, her hands no longer trembling. She was done running. Inside the courtroom, the room smelled of paper and old wood polish, cold and institutional, but not intimidating anymore. Sarah sat beside her lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair and a spine of iron. Across the room, Rick slouched in his seat. He hadn't shaved. His lawyer whispered something to him, and Rick barely nodded. He didn't look at Sarah. She didn't look away. The judge arrived promptly. What followed was a series of procedural motions: Sarah's testimony, evidence presentation, photos, the restraining order, documentation, the emergency police report, Elliot's written statement. Her voice only cracked once when she spoke of Laya. And that was the moment I realized staying wasn't strength, it was surrender. I wasn't just choosing to suffer. I was teaching my daughter that this was normal, and I won't let her grow up thinking love should hurt. Even the judge paused before responding. By the time it was Rick's turn to speak, his words came out dull and detached. He mumbled about stress and misunderstandings about being provoked. But the courtroom was no longer a place where his excuses held power. By noon, the gavel came down, divorce granted, sole custody awarded to Sarah, restraining order extended 5 years. It was over, not all of it, not the emotional echoes, but the legal weight, the shackles of her past, the illusion of obligation done. When Sarah stepped into the hallway, Elliot stood immediately. She didn't speak. She just walked into his arms, and for the first time in years, she cried not from fear, but from relief. 2 months later, summer had arrived. The house was filled with small changes, brighter curtains, Leia's artwork pinned on the fridge, a bookshelf full of paperbacks, some Elliot's, some Sarah's, and a new key hanging on the wall, Sarah's. She hadn't moved in officially, not yet, but her things were here, her rhythm, her laugh. One evening, Sarah found Elliot in the backyard fixing the light on the deck. Leia was asleep upstairs, curled up with a stuffed animal in a new chapter book. "You're always fixing things," she said, walking out barefoot onto the cool wood. He smiled, eyes squinting into the last rays of sunlight. "I like things that can be fixed." Sarah walked up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. Her voice was soft against his shoulder. "And what if I'm not something to fix?" He turned around, gently pulling her close. "Then I love you exactly as you are." She searched his face. "You love me. I've loved you since the day you showed up at my door asking for help," he said. Maybe even before that, though I didn't know it yet. Tears welled again, but this time she let them fall freely. "I love you too," she whispered, "and I want to stay, not because I need to, but because I want to." He kissed her then under the fading sky, and it was a different kiss than the one weeks ago, deeper rooted, not hesitant, not fragile. This was a kiss made of promises, not rescue, of shared mornings, not survival. Later that night, Suara stood on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching stars shimmer above. Elliot joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think," she said, "how strange life is? I was falling apart the night we met. And now this." I think Elliot said that sometimes life breaks us open so we can finally be rebuilt right. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long, long while, she felt whole. The story of Sarah and Elliot offers a powerful lesson. True strength lies in choosing to break free from fear and embrace the possibility of a new beginning. Sarah, a mother trapped in a violent marriage, found the courage to flee with her daughter Leia, seeking safety at Elliot's door. His quiet kindness, offering shelter, support, and patience, shows us that healing often starts with someone who believes in your worth when you've forgotten it. Sarah's journey from terror to empowerment teaches us that leaving an abusive past is not just an act of survival, but a profound declaration of self-love and hope for a better future. Her determination to protect Alaya and rebuild her life alongside Elliot's unwavering presence reminds us that love can be a refuge, not a cage. This story urges us to recognize the resilience within ourselves and others, to offer compassion without expectation, and to trust that even the darkest nights can lead to brighter days when we dare to take the first step. Have you or someone you know found strength in an unexpected act of kindness during a difficult time? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how hope changed your path. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage and connection. Hit the like button, share with someone who needs inspiration, and ring the bell to stay updated. Your support fuels these heartfelt stories, so join us in celebrating the power of second chances.